If I were to tell you that an artist renowned for his work in the fantasy realm wrote a story about a magical ring, the first thing you'd think about was the punk rock scene of 1985 Alabama, right? Welcome to the tips. Welcome to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, I have a review for you of Evil in Me by Brom. This is being released by Tor Nightfire on the 17th of September, and I received a complimentary copy in exchange for an honest review. For those of you who don't know, Brom is a renowned artist who has done work in the fantasy genre, going back decades, and he's done a number of work for Wizards of the Coast and Magic the Gathering, as well as a whole lot of video games and tabletop games and all these other kind of areas in the fantasy realm. He was inducted into the Origins Award Hall of Fame. The Origins Award is a group that rewards excellence in the gaming field. And so he's a renowned gothic fantasy artist, and he's written a number of novels as well. Earlier this year, I read his novel Slewfoot, which was a folk horror novel that I thought was really, really wonderful. So I jumped at the chance to read a copy of Evil in Me. And I have to say, I'm a little bit disappointed. I think mostly because I loved Slewfoot so much. I thought the writing and the characters and the story itself worked so well together in that story that I had high expectations for this. The writing is still strong. It really pulls you into the story. And the main character, Ruby, in the story is strong, but everything else doesn't hold together as well as I'd like to. What's the story about? The story takes place, for the most part, in 1985, Alabama. We follow Ruby, who is a young woman who has had some run-ins with the law. She's on work release. She lives with her mom and her mother's abusive, kind of stereotypical boyfriend. And she is estranged from her former best friend. They were in a band together through high school. Her best friend moved to Atlanta and expected Ruby to follow her, and she said she would, and then she just never did. And so they've been estranged for a couple of years. All she wants to do is go to Atlanta, make up for neglecting her friend for so long and get back into music, keep playing. So that is the setting. That's where we start. She is helping take care of an elderly neighbor, and in the process of that, he has this box of ancient religious relics, and somehow she gets possessed by this evil ring that connects her to a demon who wants to escape the hell realm that this demon is in and come back to Earth, because this demon used to rule on Earth. And yes, Brom does make at least one Lord of the Ring joke, so it's okay. He understands the world he's playing with. But so Ruby becomes possessed by this ring, and the demon is taking her soul, essentially feeding off of her power. And when Ruby gets into it, she starts engaging in wanton acts of violence that she can't control. And so she wants to get rid of this ring. This ring isn't giving her anything else, which is an interesting flip. Usually when you have a story about rock and roll and demonic possession, it's the musician selling their soul in order to become a rock god or something like this, right? That's the normal story of rock and roll and demon possession. But here it's the opposite. This possession is taking everything away from her, and all of her dreams of finally making right the wrongs that she's done, making up for the people she's hurt, and then moving to be with her friend and get back into the scene of playing music and being a real musician again, that's all being taken away by the demon who is possessing her. So that was interesting. I thought it was a fun flip on the story. Unfortunately, though, it makes the story far less compelling because she's just accidentally possessed, she doesn't do anything to warrant this possession. It could have been anyone, it was pure circumstance that it found her. And as you read in the jacket copy, the way she tries to free herself from this possession is she has to cast a spell, which is essentially a song. So she has to write a song and get people to sing along with her in huge numbers so their power together can create this spell that will free her from the possession of this demon. And so that takes her on a trip to meet her estranged best friend, to try to get the band back together, to try to write a hit song that can then be celebrated and performed. And that group energy can, be a magical spell to break her of her possession. I don't know, the story just feels like it's avoiding all of the interesting things. What does it mean to be possessed when she can't control herself? And what does it mean to be so long estranged from someone you care about so deeply? And to be so far estranged from the music and from playing the music that made you feel like a complete person. Like those are all interesting things that are brought up, but not really explored in any meaningful way. And all of the secondary characters besides Ruby, they don't feel like cardboard cutouts. Like they feel genuine, but you don't get a lot of information about them. So you just kind of touch upon them, and they may be somewhat archetypical. That's okay. They don't, it doesn't feel exploitative or lazy. It feels like there's story there, but you don't get to spend enough time with them for it to be interesting. I thought Ruby was an interesting, complicated character. I like her journey, but her journey exists before she becomes possessed, right? This possession doesn't put her on a new path. It doesn't teach her anything new about herself. It just fast forwards her timeline of what she wants to be doing anyway, and her understanding of herself is in the world. But this is a journey she already wanted to go on, right? Which is why it doesn't feel like this possession element is compelling. Now, like I said, the writing is still strong, and the pacing for the story, which I didn't love the story, but the pacing itself I think is good. It keeps moving through. And what Brom does really well is every once in a while he jumps to a different point of view, and you have an entirely separate character who is essentially a middle-aged white guy who has decided to become a serial killer and has just started killing young women, basically for no reason, because he was bored and he wanted to see if he could truly be evil. And so he started doing this. And you start following him, and you find out that the demon who has possessed Ruby knows that Ruby is trying to break the possession. And so she's basically sending out these like psychic calls to any evil entity in the area. So Ruby becomes this like beacon for different sorts of evil activity. And that includes this random serial killer who you follow once in a while. So obviously the two of their stories are going to intersect in an interesting way. And I appreciated that idea. And as soon as you meet him, obviously the only reason he's being introduced is because he's going to cross paths with Ruby at some point. So I appreciated the idea, but again, his character just seemed like underbaked. Like it was a really interesting idea of this guy who had like a very normal middle of the road life who was just bored. And so he decided to start killing to prove he could be evil. So it's very strange. I appreciate what Brom is trying to do. I appreciate stylistically, in terms of plotting, how it pulls us away from the main story just enough to A, forecast something ominous in the future, but B, also let us breathe a little bit from Ruby's story, so then we want to get back to it. So in terms of pacing, it's a really good literary device. In terms of this character's story, there was something there, it just wasn't as much as it could have been. It wasn't fleshed out the way I would have wanted it to be. Overall, I did have fun with the story. I'm glad I read it. I'm always excited or interested in kind of possession stories and religious horror. And I think Brom does a great job of taking an interesting approach to religious horror that is not common. It's not what you would normally expect. The demon and the kind of sub-demons and these other kind of occult characters that play into the story aren't what you would normally expect or come to find in contemporary possession or occult horror. So I thought that was interesting and intriguing. I thought it was a fresh spin. I liked the idea of flipping the narrative of not wanting to be possessed, but being possessed being what takes away your power as opposed to gives you power. And of course, most possession stories are like that. But when you combine them with rock and roll, usually it's the other way around. I will say the whole rock and roll of the story, so the whole point of Ruby is that she's not into rock and roll, she's into punk rock. And you get some really great name drops of great punk rock bands of the early 80s, seminal bands. And that, I think, is wonderful. But that's about as far as you go into world building, right? That that she's an outsider, that she, wears ripped clothing and she likes punk rock. And that is as far as you go to understanding the world. So if you understand the nature of a small town in the South in 1985 and what it means to be an outsider, then the world is already built for you. If you don't have that pre-existing knowledge, then the story does not go out of its way to give you a whole lot. You know that Ruby's an outsider. You know that she feels like she is put upon from the world, that everyone is against her, and that aligns with her relating to punk rock music, which at this point everyone thinks is the devil's music anyway. Everything is conspiring against her in this way, but that is the extent of the world building. So if you go into it knowing what the Satanic Panic was and what it meant to celebrate countercultural art and anti-establishment art in the early 80s, what it means to be from a small town, a religious small town where you stick out like a sore thumb, like all of those experiences, if you have them, then the story kind of gives you everything you need. But if you don't have them, then you're just left like with an impression, right? So I think Brom could have done a better job building the world because he expects you to know all this going into it. And I did know it, so I understood Ruby in a way and I understood the world that she was living in. But I think he could have done a better job of laying it out there more clearly, because all you really get is a sense of social isolation and this longing and this not fitting in and missing her friend and being a fuck up and who can't do anything right. But that could be anything, right? Like, it didn't have to be in 1985 Alabama with someone who loves punk rock to meet any of those characteristics. So that was a little bit disappointing. So if you have high expectations going in, especially if you've read other work by him like Slewfoot, then you might be let down a little bit. But if you just want a fun rock and roll story that plays with religious themes and ideas, that is exploring what it means to find yourself, to understand who you are when you are the outsider who feels like you're constantly being persecuted and you live in a world that doesn't understand you, what it means to go on that journey to find yourself, to connect with your tribe, as it may be, then that's a fun journey. And, Brom does that journey justice in many ways. So, there is a lot of fun here. Just isn't what I had hoped it could be, because it has a lot more potential, I think, than it lives up to. So I do recommend it. I think it's a good time. I just, temper your expectations. I will say that, again, Brom is an artist, and so the story contains a lot of his full color artwork. And the version of it I read was a advanced reader copy, so I didn't get any of that artwork. I only have the cover. But when the actual published version will have about 24 pieces of art throughout. And I know that reading Slewfoot, it was the same way, and that art really added to the story. I thought it really complemented the story in great ways. And just the way he describes some of the demons and some of the more nefarious characters in this story, I can only imagine what the art is going to be. So I'm confident that the art will be really great. I think the artistry of the cover is really eye-catching. I will say that this main figure on the cover, I suppose is supposed to be Ruby, does not look like a punk rocker. Like, she looks like she belongs at Woodstock. So there's a little bit of a disconnect with these kind of bright colors and, even the clothes she's wearing. This does not look punk rock to me at all. This looks like a hippie that has gone wrong. But with that said, it is still compelling and eye-catching art. And I'm confident that the other art, especially the art regarding the demons, just the way he describes them, you can tell he had fun creating them. So I'm sure the art will also complement it. I just can't speak to it because I have not seen it yet, because that wasn't part of the copy I was given. That's unfortunately all I have to say. I wish I had better things to say about it. I really liked Slewfoot, and I did like a lot of this story. It just didn't live up to my expectations, and I thought it could have been a little bit more. If the world building was a little bit more in detail and the stakes felt a little higher, Again, though, I'm not really knocking it. I had a fun time reading it. I'm sure the art is going to be beautiful and complement the story. And I think it is well written for you if you're interested in religious horror and different interesting takes on religious horror. Then there's definitely something here for you, And if you like the idea of following the outsider and what it means to find yourself through journey, and especially through the power of art, then I think there's also something appealing in this story. However, I think that's all I have. Have any of you read this story? What about other books by Brom? Or maybe you have celebrated some of his artwork, including his covers for novels and video games and movie posters and so forth. Let me know down in the comments. For now, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I appreciate you. Be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.